Hey guys, Paul here. Lately I've been getting into making birch bark baskets. Really a lot of fun. Bound with natural willow branch here. However, you can also use spruce and hemlock root or very thin rawhide. Go over some of the supplies here. You're going to need sheets of birch bark in good shape. You don't want stuff that's rotted out with mold and fungus and stuff like that. You want nice clean sheets of birch bark, and I've got a few different ones here. Sustainably harvested from dead logs on the forest floor. You don't want to be peeling this off live trees. And I've got some willow branch. Willow branch is very pliable. The Native Americans also made baskets out of this stuff. Matter of fact, here's a willow branch basket I made a couple of years ago with some red twig dogwood mixed in, really nice. And I use it to keep my thumb drives and computer adapters and stuff like that. You can see the base of that. Tools, you're going to want a pencil for marking. You're going to want an awl or a very sharp pointed knife. I'm using my Mora 106 here. Very sharp point, very fine point. It's really good. It acts as a very good awl as well as a knife in this application. I'm using a small needle nose pliers for grabbing the willow to pull it through. And you want a good pair of shears for cutting the bark. Now here are a couple patterns I like to use, and it's really helpful to develop some of your patterns with paper initially. You get a good sense for what you're going to do with your birch bark by practicing on paper first. And this right here is the archetypal pattern of the northeastern U.S. Native Americans with the birch bark basket making. Doing research, this pattern right here is the archetypal pattern. It's the one that's used the most, and it's really a great design. It's got some nice rounded cutaways, and you can put the flaps inside or outside, but this is how it goes. And what's really cool about this is that the pattern is rounded, and therefore it minimizes breakage with the birch bark. So after these two ends get tacked or stitched in, you can see that the base of this is wider than the opening top. This is a very basic pattern I'm doing here in very basic stitching, just one stitch there of the willow branch. However, really nice, fine Native American basket making features stitching all the way around this seam to the point that these things are actually watertight. But for just starting out, it's fine to just practice with that one stitch there. What we're going to do is we're going to make a square shape out of this. So try to use as much of the birch bark as you can. So what I'm going to do, I could probably get two square pieces out of this, if you can see that right there. Two nice square pieces. So I'll cut this one right here. And cut it nice and straight. An interesting thing with the birch bark is that the grain, just like wood, runs in one direction. So one thing I'm noticing is that it's really best to make this fold, the outside fold, going with the grain. Because if you make it going against the grain, that's more prone to crackage, as you can see there. If we fold the birch bark going with the grain, it can crack along that seam, versus going with the grain is much better. So when we lay out our birch bark, we want this to be going this way with the grain. So what I like to do first of all is mark out where the square in the middle is going to be, in the center of my birch bark here. And then you want to cut that round shape just like that from the center Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but the more perfect you make it, the better. Just going to make a quick basket for you here. Alright, good. So you can see we cut those kind of tongues, if you would, going with the grain. Now what you do here is make kind of a cutaway, curved going into that top of that, like so, on each side, equidistant. And a good pair of fabric shears really works nicely with the birch bark. Just keep your shears sharp. Angle those ends a little bit there. Alright, same thing here on the other side, and make sure that your cuts line up with where you had your cuts over here. Every step of the way you have to be kind of making sure that things are lining up nicely. And that's why you might want to use a measuring tape. But I'm just kind of going for the overall feel of it. Again, cutting away our angles there on the ends. Just a little bit. I would say that's like a 30-degree angle maybe on the ends, not much. So you can see that these ends are going to hit each other. So what I'm going to do is actually cut some of the point off those ends so they don't hit each other too much. And you'll be able to tell as you work along about how stuff is going. Alright, cool. And then fold that side over there. See where we're going with that? This willow has a lot of little nubs on it, so they don't get threaded through real easy. So I just go along with my knife and I just remove those nubs, because those are points at which the willow will break if it's strained through those little nubs, or where the buds were basically on that tree, on the branch. So just kind of go through and I take those off. You could do this ahead of time too. It's probably a better idea, but just kind of lay them flat on the table. Be very careful with your knife. But just kind of shave that off. Make it really nice and smooth. And that will go a lot better that way. I'm just putting the tip of my knife in here. I'm going to make a hole all the way through. Be very careful where your fingers are when you do this. And I'm putting this hole about in the center of my wood. And just be very careful, especially if you're using a Mora 106, man. These things are wicked sharp. Wicked sharp. Especially if you keep them sharpened nicely on a stone. Just enough to get the willow branch through. Kind of open that up a little bit. And then I'm just going to thread that through. Okay. Now with the willow, you want to bend it where there's not one of those nubs where the bud was. Okay, because it'll break there. So I've kind of learned that the hard way. So what you do is just bend it right there in the middle. That's a good spot. All we're going to do is just tie a very simple half knot, not even a full knot, because it'll break if you tie a full knot. Just be very careful as you're doing this part of it. This is where the snub or the needle nose come into handy. Kind of grab that like that and pull it taut. See right there? And that's really all I do. Because you can see when this willow dries, it's wood. I mean, if anything, I'm just going to put a little dab of glue in there, or pine pitch. I am going to trim off some of this, but not too much, because when it dries, it's going to contract. So I'm going to give it a good quarter to half inch, at least, well, more like a half inch of slack there. And same thing on the inside. Alright, so we got one side done up. Looks really nice. Let's do the other side. It's a little more tricky on this side because if you're making a small basket like this, you kind of have to finesse it because the angle is not going to be... Now you could make all your holes ahead of time. I should mention that I soaked this willow before starting this video because I actually cut these willow branches a couple days ago and they've been drying out a little bit. So by soaking them in a sink for about 20 minutes, it's made them pliable again, which is helpful. And you want to do the same thing with your spruce root or your hemlock root. Definitely want this stuff to be pliable. Pull that taut, nice and tight. Good. All right, we've got a very nice little birch bark basket. Just took us a few minutes to make it. Again, the larger piece of birch bark you have, the bigger basket you can make. You know, you can make some really nice large containers. But I'm finding that it's a lot of fun to start small. And actually starting small, you get a really good system down with this stuff. And it can easily translate into a larger basket. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel. And we'll see you guys real soon.